Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries, and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Part 1. Early Life and Influences. Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743, in Shadwell, Virginia, into a family of substantial means and influence. Growing up on his family's plantation, Jefferson was exposed to the privileged life of Virginia's planter class, but he also faced early losses, including the death of his father, Peter Jefferson, when he was just 14. Peter, a respected surveyor, cartographer, and planter, had instilled in young Thomas a love for learning and an appreciation for the natural world. This influence would shape Jefferson's lifelong curiosity and passion for knowledge. After his father's death, Jefferson became responsible for managing family lands, a role that exposed him to the complexities of plantation life and the institution of slavery, which would later become a dark and conflicted aspect of his legacy. Jefferson's education began with tutors at home and later at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. There, he developed a deep interest in philosophy, science, and law, and he became acquainted with leading intellectuals and professors who exposed him to the ideas of the Enlightenment. Among these influences was Dr. William Small, a Scottish professor who introduced him to advanced scientific concepts and the works of thinkers like John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton. This exposure to Enlightenment ideas profoundly shaped Jefferson's worldview, instilling in him a belief in reason, individual rights, and the potential for societal progress. His intellectual curiosity was unbounded, and he developed a reputation as an exceptional student with a passion for literature, history, and political philosophy. Following his studies, Jefferson trained as a lawyer under George Wythe, one of the most prominent legal minds of colonial America. Through this apprenticeship, Jefferson gained not only legal knowledge, but also an understanding of the principles of justice and governance. His early work as a lawyer provided him with insights into the legal structures of colonial America, and he became increasingly interested in the political theories that would shape his vision for a just society. Jefferson's commitment to individual rights and the rule of law became evident during these years, as he began to see the British colonial system as increasingly oppressive. His legal career introduced him to the realities of colonial life and set the stage for his eventual role in the independence movement. These formative experiences in education, law, and plantation management provided the foundation for Jefferson's future as a statesman and thinker. They helped cultivate the values that would drive his political career: a dedication to freedom, a passion for knowledge, and an enduring belief in the principles of democracy. By the time he entered the political sphere, Jefferson was already a man of considerable intellectual stature, poised to influence the revolutionary currents that were sweeping through the American colonies. His journey from a young planter's son in Virginia to a prominent advocate for independence and equality was just beginning, and the ideals instilled in him during his formative years would guide his actions in the decades to come. Part 2. Jefferson's early political career and rise to prominence. Thomas Jefferson's political journey began in Virginia, where he first entered public service as a representative in the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1769. This early political role allowed him to gain insight into colonial governance and the struggles facing Virginia's citizenry under British rule. Jefferson's strong stance against the policies of the British government quickly became apparent. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and other British-imposed taxes and regulations were deeply unpopular among colonists, and Jefferson aligned himself with the growing resistance movement. This early experience in legislative service was critical in shaping his political philosophy and principles. It was during these formative years that Jefferson began to articulate his views on individual liberty, limited government, and the rights of the people to self-governance. One of Jefferson's earliest major contributions to the revolutionary cause was his pamphlet, A Summary View of the Rights of British America, written in 1774. This document criticized British policies and asserted that the colonies had the natural right to self-rule. Jefferson argued that the British Crown's authority over the colonies was illegitimate unless it was grounded in the consent of the governed. This pamphlet not only established Jefferson as an influential thinker within the revolutionary movement, but it also demonstrated his ability to communicate complex ideas in a way that resonated with the American public. A summary view was widely circulated and brought Jefferson recognition among colonial leaders, laying the groundwork for his future role in the independence movement. As the colonies moved closer to declaring independence, Jefferson's stature grew. He was appointed as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in 1775, representing Virginia during a critical period in the emerging conflict with Britain. Although he was relatively young compared to other delegates, Jefferson quickly distinguished himself as an eloquent writer and thinker. His clear, persuasive style and ability to distill complex political ideas into powerful language made him a valuable asset to the Congress. When the time came to draft a formal Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was chosen as the primary author. His selection for this role was a testament to his growing influence and the trust his fellow delegates placed in his ability to articulate the colony's grievances and aspirations. Jefferson's authorship of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 marked the pinnacle of his early political career. The Declaration not only declared a colony's intention to separate from Britain, but also articulated universal principles of human rights and government that would shape American identity. Jefferson's famous words, asserting that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, captured the revolutionary spirit and Enlightenment ideals that fueled the fight for independence. Although the document was a collective effort, Jefferson's voice and vision were unmistakable, and the Declaration became a symbol of American values and aspirations. His role in its creation solidified his place in American history as a champion of liberty and justice. Jefferson's early political career, from his time in the Virginia House of Burgesses to his pivotal role in drafting the Declaration, set the stage for his later accomplishments. His dedication to individual rights, resistance to tyranny, and commitment to democratic principles established him as a leading figure in the American Revolution. This period of his life laid the foundation for his subsequent contributions to the new nation, as he continued to advocate for a government that respected and protected the rights of its citizens. Jefferson's early rise to prominence was fueled by his passion for justice and his vision of a free, self-governing republic, a vision that would continue to guide him in the years to come. Part 3. The role in drafting the Declaration of Independence. The drafting of the Declaration of Independence is one of Thomas Jefferson's most celebrated achievements. Selected by the Continental Congress to write this historic document, Jefferson crafted what would become one of the most iconic statements of human rights and liberty. When the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in 1776, the question of independence had become a pressing issue. The colonies were embroiled in open conflict with British forces, and the need to formally declare separation from British rule was growing stronger. In early June, Richard Henry Lee proposed a resolution for independence, and Congress appointed a committee of 5 men to draft a declaration. Jefferson was chosen for his writing skills, trusted by his colleagues to capture the spirit of the Revolution. The committee included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, but Jefferson, as the primary author, was tasked with putting pen to paper. Retreating to a small rented room in Philadelphia, he began drafting what would become the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's draft was shaped by Enlightenment ideals and his deep commitment to natural rights. He drew inspiration from philosophers like John Locke, who argued for the rights to life, liberty, and property, and Montesquieu, who emphasized the importance of a balanced government. Jefferson's vision was a blend of these influences, and he set out to create a document that would define the colonists' grievances while laying the groundwork for a new, independent nation. In his draft, Jefferson articulated the belief that all men are created equal and are endowed with unalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words became the core of the Declaration and embodied the revolutionary spirit of the colonies. Jefferson's prose, clear and powerful, expressed the universal ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance that would inspire generations to come. However, his draft underwent revisions and edits by Congress. Some of the most notable changes included the removal of a passage that condemned slavery, a decision that reflected the contentious and unresolved issue of slavery in the colonies. Jefferson was disappointed by these edits. yet the core message of the document remained intact. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence, formally breaking ties with Britain and declaring the colonies as free and independent states. Jefferson's role as the Declaration's author cemented his legacy as one of America's founding figures. The document was a bold assertion of the rights of the people to establish their own government, and it set a powerful precedent for democracy. Jefferson's words not only galvanized the American people, but also resonated across the world, inspiring revolutions and movements for freedom in France, Latin America, and beyond. The Declaration became more than a statement of independence. It was a blueprint for a government that respected individual rights and the rule of law. Jefferson's role in drafting the Declaration showcased his abilities as a writer and thinker, and it positioned him as a key advocate for the principles that would define the United States. The values he enshrined in the Declaration would later guide him throughout his career, influencing his decisions as a legislator, diplomat, and president. Although Jefferson was not always able to live up to the ideals he espoused, his words in the Declaration became a standard by which future generations would judge both him and the nation he helped to establish. His vision of a government based on the consent of the governed, dedicated to protecting individual rights, remains central to the American identity. The Declaration of Independence stands as a lasting testament to Jefferson's belief in liberty, justice, and the enduring power of human rights. Part 4. Ambassador to France and advocate of Republican ideals. Following his role in the American Revolution and the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson took on a new diplomatic mission as the United States Minister to France in 1785. He was chosen for this post due to his strong intellect, diplomatic skills, and deep understanding of Enlightenment principles, which resonated with many French thinkers and statesmen. Jefferson's assignment in France marked a significant chapter in his life and expanded his vision of governance, culture, and international relations. While representing the young United States, Jefferson would experience firsthand the turbulent political landscape of pre-revolutionary France and develop friendships with some of the leading figures of the French Enlightenment. His experiences in France would later influence his approach to democracy, government, and society. As ambassador, Jefferson's role was to maintain positive relations with France, negotiate treaties, and secure favorable trade agreements. He worked diligently to strengthen economic ties, recognizing the importance of commerce in sustaining American independence. At the time, France was still the United States' most important ally, having provided crucial support during the American Revolution. Jefferson's diplomacy aimed to solidify this alliance and help the United States establish itself as a respected nation on the world stage. He sought to open up French markets to American goods, particularly tobacco and other agricultural products, which were essential to the economy of his home state, Virginia. Through his efforts, Jefferson succeeded in improving commercial relations, which helped bolster the young nation's economy and stability. During his time in Paris, Jefferson also immersed himself in French intellectual circles, where he encountered influential thinkers like Marquis de Condorcet, Lafayette, and Benjamin Franklin, who had preceded him as ambassador. These interactions reinforced Jefferson's commitment to Republican ideals and his opposition to monarchy and aristocratic privilege. He observed the disparities between the French elite and the common people, which deepened his belief in the need for a more egalitarian society. As he witnessed the early stages of the French Revolution, Jefferson sympathized with the movement's democratic aspirations, though he became increasingly concerned with its radical direction. The violence and upheaval of the revolution later served as a cautionary example of how unchecked power and social unrest could lead to chaos. Jefferson's experiences in France also influenced his tastes in art, architecture, and science. He was particularly inspired by classical European architecture, which later influenced his design of Monticello and the University of Virginia. Jefferson's appreciation for French culture and knowledge of its political developments enriched his understanding of governance and society. Yet he remained critical of certain European values, particularly those that undermined individual rights or placed too much power in the hands of monarchs and elites. Jefferson's observations in France reaffirmed his commitment to a government rooted in the will of the people and dedicated to the protection of personal freedoms. By the time he returned to the United States in 1789, Jefferson had gained invaluable experience as a diplomat and had refined his vision for the new nation. He believed that America should avoid the extremes of the French Revolution while still embodying the democratic ideals it championed. His time in France solidified his views on republicanism and prepared him for the challenges he would face as a leader back home. As ambassador, Jefferson helped establish the United States as a credible, independent nation on the international stage. His dedication to Republican principles and diplomatic skill strengthened America's ties with France and provided a foundation for his later work as Secretary of State and President. Jefferson's ambassadorship in France was transformative, broadening his outlook and deepening his dedication to democratic values. The lessons he learned during these years would stay with him, influencing his approach to governance and shaping his vision for the American Republic. His commitment to Republican ideals and his diplomatic achievements set him apart as a statesman with a unique understanding of both American and European political dynamics. This experience abroad prepared Jefferson to guide the United States through its next critical stages of development. Part 5. Secretary of State and Struggles with Foreign Relations. Thomas Jefferson returned to the United States in 1789 at a pivotal moment in the young republic's history. George Washington, the first president of the United States, selected Jefferson as his Secretary of State, a position that would place him at the heart of American foreign policy decisions. Jefferson's tenure as Secretary of State from 1790 to 1793 was marked by intense political and diplomatic challenges as the United States sought to maintain its neutrality amid growing tensions between European powers. Jefferson was deeply committed to protecting American independence, and he believed that foreign alliances, particularly with European monarchies, should be avoided at all costs. His vision for the United States was one of self-reliance, where the nation could prosper without being entangled in the conflicts of foreign powers. At the time, the United States faced numerous threats and challenges on the world stage. Relations with Britain were particularly strained due to lingering issues from the Revolutionary War, such as British interference with American shipping and the presence of British troops in Western territories. In addition, the French Revolution had erupted in 1789, further complicating matters. As the French Republic declared war against several European monarchies, including Britain, the United States was caught between the competing interests of its two former allies, France and Britain. Jefferson, who had been a strong supporter of the French Revolution, favored siding with France in this struggle, seeing it as a natural ally in the promotion of Republican ideals. He believed that America's democratic experiment should support the cause of liberty abroad, even if it meant confronting Britain. However, President Washington, along with his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, held a different view. Washington sought to maintain neutrality, fearing that becoming involved in the European conflict would place the United States in a precarious position, both politically and militarily. Washington's decision to issue the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793 was a direct contradiction to Jefferson's stance, and it set the stage for a bitter political divide between the two men. Jefferson, who had hoped for a more sympathetic American stance toward France, was frustrated by the president's unwillingness to challenge Britain. Jefferson's opposition to Washington's foreign policy decisions became a key factor in his growing dissatisfaction with the administration, and it helped fuel his eventual break with the Federalist Party. Jefferson's belief in an independent foreign policy, free from European entanglements, was rooted in his vision for an agrarian republic. He believed that the United States should focus on expanding its territory and developing its internal resources, rather than getting involved in foreign wars that would drain its resources and destabilize its fragile democracy. Jefferson's policy of avoiding foreign entanglements was consistent with his larger vision for the country, which emphasized states' rights, individual liberty, and limited government. He feared that strong federal power, especially in foreign policy, would lead to the erosion of personal freedoms and the concentration of power in the hands of a centralized government. Despite his disagreements with Washington, Jefferson's tenure as Secretary of State was not without achievements. He played a key role in negotiating treaties with Native American tribes and securing the United States borders, including the successful Treaty of Paris, 1791, with Spain, which resolved long-standing boundary disputes in the West. He also helped negotiate the Jay Treaty with Britain, which sought to resolve many of the post-revolutionary issues between the two nations, although Jefferson was opposed to some of its terms. In addition, Jefferson was instrumental in shaping American trade policy, advocating for tariffs and measures to protect American industries from European competition. Jefferson's time as Secretary of State solidified his position as one of the leading figures in American politics and laid the groundwork for his eventual presidential campaign. His foreign policy disagreements with Washington and Hamilton led to the formation of the first political parties in the United States, the Democratic-Republican Party, which Jefferson would lead, in opposition to the Federalist Party. These political divisions would come to define American politics in the 1790s, and Jefferson's growing dissatisfaction with the policies of Washington's administration marked the beginning of his own political rise. The experiences and frustrations Jefferson faced as Secretary of State would profoundly influence his later actions as president. He had a clear vision for how the United States should interact with the world and a deep belief in the country's potential to flourish without interference from European powers. Jefferson's diplomatic struggles during this time set the stage for his election to the presidency in 1800, where he would have the opportunity to put his vision of American foreign policy into practice. Part 6. The Election of 1800 and the Revolution of 1800. The election of 1800 stands as one of the most significant and contentious elections in American history. For Thomas Jefferson, this election was not merely a campaign for office, but struggle over the future direction of the young republic. The race between Jefferson and incumbent president, John Adams, symbolized a deep divide within American society. Jefferson led the Democratic-Republican Party, which advocated for a decentralized government, states' rights, and a focus on agrarian values. Adams, on the other hand, represented the Federalist Party, which supported a strong central government, a powerful military, and close ties with Britain. This ideological conflict gave the election a sense of urgency and passion, as both sides believed the future of the nation hung in the balance. The campaign was marked by bitter attacks, accusations, and a level of partisan rhetoric previously unseen in American politics. Federalists labeled Jefferson as an atheist and a radical who would dismantle the government, while Democratic Republicans portrayed Adams as a monarchist who sought to centralize power at the expense of liberty. Newspapers and pamphlets became battlegrounds for supporters of both parties, who used the press to attack their opponents and rally support. For Jefferson, the stakes were clear. He believed the Federalist vision was at odds with the values of the American Revolution and that the country needed a return to the principles of republicanism and individual rights. He saw his campaign as an opportunity to steer the United States away from aristocratic tendencies and toward a more democratic society. The electoral process itself was fraught with complications. In the Electoral College, Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, each received 73 votes, resulting in a tie that had to be resolved by the House of Representatives. The House, controlled by Federalists, deliberated for days as Federalist representatives weighed their options. Many were reluctant to support Jefferson, whom they viewed as a dangerous radical, but ultimately, after 36 ballots, Jefferson emerged as the victor. This drawn-out process underscored the weaknesses in the original electoral system and highlighted the dangers of partisan politics. The experience would later lead to the 12th Amendment, which changed the way the president and vice president were elected, helping to prevent future electoral deadlocks. Jefferson's victory is often referred to as the Revolution of 1800 because it marked the first peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another in American history. This peaceful transition was a major achievement for the new republic and demonstrated that political differences could be resolved through democratic means rather than violence or authoritarian measures. For Jefferson, the election's outcome was a validation of the democratic experiment that he and his contemporaries had helped to establish. He viewed his presidency as an opportunity to restore the values of the Revolution and to implement policies that reflected the interests of the common people rather than the elite. Once in office, Jefferson set out to reduce the power of the federal government and to promote a more frugal, minimalist approach to governance. He cut back on federal spending, reduced the size of the military, and sought to limit the influence of the national government in the lives of ordinary Americans. His policies reflected his belief that a large, centralized government posed a threat to individual liberties, and that a truly democratic society required a government that was limited and responsive to the will of the people. Jefferson's approach to governance would come to define his presidency and set a precedent for future Democratic-Republican administrations. The election of 1800 was more than a political victory for Jefferson. It was a turning point in American history that reinforced the principles of democracy and established the legitimacy of political opposition. It proved that the United States could survive fierce ideological battles without resorting to authoritarianism or violence. For Jefferson, the Revolution of 1800 was a confirmation of his belief in the power of the people and the resilience of the Republic. His successful election marked the beginning of a new era in American politics, one that valued individual rights, limited government, and the democratic principles he had championed throughout his career. Part 7. Jefferson's Vision for a Limited Government. Upon assuming the presidency in 1801, Thomas Jefferson was determined to enact his vision of a government that prioritized simplicity, efficiency, and restraint. Jefferson's core belief was that government should interfere as little as possible in the lives of its citizens, a philosophy that guided many of his policies as president. He viewed a large federal government as a potential threat to individual liberty, believing that concentrated power would lead to corruption and the erosion of personal freedoms. Jefferson's approach to governance was a marked shift from the Federalist policies of his predecessors, which had emphasized a strong central government, expansive military, and close relations with Britain. For Jefferson, limiting the government's power was essential to preserving the ideals of the American Revolution and ensuring that democracy thrived. One of Jefferson's first acts as president was to reduce the size and cost of the federal government. He believed that a government operating with minimal resources would be less likely to overreach, so he introduced significant cuts in federal spending. Jefferson and his Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin set out to reduce the national debt, which they viewed as a burden on future generations and a potential excuse for increasing government power. Through budget cuts and careful financial management, they reduced military expenses, eliminated internal taxes, and balanced the budget without sacrificing essential services. This frugal approach to government aligned with Jefferson's vision of a wise and frugal government that, in his words, would restrain men from injuring one another, but otherwise leave them free to regulate their own pursuits. Jefferson's emphasis on limited government also extended to the military. He believed that a large standing army posed a danger to Republican values and could lead to unnecessary foreign entanglements. Consequently, he cut the size of the army and reduced the Navy, maintaining only a modest force for coastal defense. Instead, he advocated for a militia system in which citizen soldiers would defend the nation if needed. This approach was not without its critics, who argued that it left the United States vulnerable, but Jefferson was steadfast in his belief that a smaller military was essential to preserving liberty. His decision to reduce the military was also a way to avoid the high costs associated with a large armed force, furthering his goal of reducing government expenditure and paying down the national debt. Another key aspect of Jefferson's limited government philosophy was his stance on federalism and states' rights. He believed that the Constitution intended for most powers to be reserved for the states, with the federal government playing a secondary role. Jefferson saw the federal system as a safeguard against tyranny, arguing that local governments were closer to the people and therefore more accountable. During his presidency, he sought to decentralize power and advocated for the rights of states to make decisions on matters not expressly delegated to the federal government. His belief in a limited federal government would become a defining feature of the Democratic-Republican Party, setting it apart from the Federalists, who favored a stronger national government. While Jefferson's commitment to limited government was widely popular among his supporters, it was not without challenges. As president, he was sometimes forced to make decisions that seemed to contradict his philosophy. For example, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which doubled the size of the United States, raised questions about the extent of executive power and the role of federal authority. Although Jefferson was concerned about the constitutional implications, he ultimately went ahead with the purchase, seeing it as an opportunity too valuable to pass up. This decision highlighted the complexities and occasional contradictions in Jefferson's vision, as he balanced his ideals with the practical realities of governance. Jefferson's vision of a limited government left a lasting impact on American political philosophy. His presidency marked a departure from the more centralized policies of Federalists and helped establish the principle that government should serve the people with minimal interference in their daily lives. Jefferson's commitment to reducing federal power, promoting states' rights, and safeguarding individual liberties would influence future generations of American leaders and remain a cornerstone of American political thought. Through his actions, Jefferson sought to create a government that was both restrained and responsive, ensuring that the principles of the Revolution continued to guide the United States. Part 8. The Louisiana Purchase and Expansion of the Republic. One of the most significant achievements of Thomas Jefferson's presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, a monumental acquisition that doubled the size of the United States and reshaped the nation's future. In 1803, Jefferson seized the opportunity to purchase the vast territory of Louisiana from France, led by Napoleon Bonaparte. At the time, France was engaged in conflicts across Europe and found itself in need of funds to support its military campaigns. Additionally, maintaining control over such a large and distant territory was increasingly difficult for the French. Napoleon's offer to sell Louisiana to the United States presented Jefferson with a unique chance to secure valuable land that would fuel the country's growth and development. However, the decision to proceed with the purchase was not without its challenges, particularly for a president deeply committed to limited government and strict constitutional interpretation. Jefferson initially viewed the purchase with caution, as he had long argued that the federal government should only exercise powers explicitly granted by the Constitution. Now he faced a dilemma. The Constitution did not explicitly grant the president the authority to acquire new territory. Jefferson worried that this decision could set a precedent for expanding executive power beyond constitutional limits. Despite these reservations, he recognized the strategic and economic value of the Louisiana Territory. The acquisition would secure access to the Mississippi River, a crucial waterway for trade, and the port of New Orleans, which was essential for American farmers and merchants in the Western Territories. After consulting with his advisors, Jefferson ultimately decided to prioritize the nation's long-term interests, even if it meant stretching his interpretation of the Constitution. In April 1803, Jefferson sent James Monroe and Robert Livingston to France to negotiate the purchase. The resulting agreement, known as the Louisiana Purchase Treaty, transferred approximately 828,000 square miles of land from France to the United States for $15 million. This was an incredible bargain, as it amounted to roughly 4 cents per acre. When news of the purchase reached the American public, it was met with widespread enthusiasm. The addition of such a vast territory promised economic growth, abundant resources, and an opportunity for American citizens to settle new lands. This expansion fit perfectly with Jefferson's vision of an empire of liberty, where independent farmers and landowners would form the backbone of the republic. He believed that this expansion would help preserve democracy by providing space for the growth of an agrarian society, which he saw as essential to maintaining American independence and virtue. However, not everyone in Congress supported the purchase. Federalists, in particular, were concerned about the impact of adding such a large territory to the nation, fearing it would weaken the influence of the eastern states and increase the power of Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party. They argued that the expansion would lead to complications in governance and potentially strain the resources of the young republic. Despite these objections, Congress approved the purchase, and the United States took formal possession of the Louisiana Territory in December 1803. This acquisition marked a turning point in American history, as it set the stage for westward expansion and transformed the United States into a continental power. Following the purchase, Jefferson commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the newly acquired lands and assess the region's potential. Led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the expedition set out in 1804 to map the territory, establish relations with Native American tribes, and gather information about the area's flora, fauna, and geography. This journey provided invaluable insights into the American West and fueled the nation's interest in further exploration and settlement. Jefferson's vision for the United States as a nation of independent farmers relied on the successful integration of these Western lands, which he believed would sustain democracy and strengthen the Republic. The Louisiana Purchase remains one of the most celebrated achievements of Jefferson's presidency and a defining moment in American history. It represented a bold and transformative decision that expanded the nation's borders, secured essential resources, and opened new opportunities for generations to come. Jefferson's willingness to take a pragmatic approach to the Constitution, despite his strict interpretationist views, demonstrated his commitment to the nation's best interests. The acquisition of Louisiana not only changed the geographic and economic landscape of the United States, but also reinforced Jefferson's belief in the potential of the American people to build a nation rooted in liberty and self-reliance. Through the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson fulfilled his vision of an expanding republic that would offer land, opportunity, and prosperity to future citizens. This purchase became a foundational moment in the history of American expansion, one that set the stage for the nation's growth and its emergence as a continental power. The decision to expand westward and embrace new possibilities ultimately strengthened the United States and solidified Jefferson's legacy as a president who looked beyond immediate concerns to shape the country's long-term future. Part 9. The Lewis and Clark Expedition. With the vast Louisiana Territory now under U.S. control, President Thomas Jefferson saw an opportunity to explore and understand the new land's resources and potential. Jefferson's scientific curiosity and belief in expansion led him to organize an expedition to gather valuable information about the geography, wildlife, and Native American tribes in the region. In 1804, he appointed his private secretary, Meriwether Lewis, to lead this ambitious journey, and Lewis chose his friend, William Clark, to co-lead the expedition. Known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition, or the Corps of Discovery, this journey would become one of the most famous explorations in American history, embodying Jefferson's vision of discovery, progress, and national expansion. The expedition officially began in May 1804, departing from St. Louis and traveling up the Missouri River. The Corps of Discovery consisted of a diverse group of individuals, including soldiers, skilled hunters, interpreters, and enslaved people such as York, who was Clark's servant. The expedition was well supplied with items for trade, as well as tools, scientific equipment, and journals to document their findings. Jefferson had instructed Lewis and Clark to chart a course to the Pacific Ocean, establish diplomatic relations with Native American tribes, and report on the natural resources available in the Western lands. The president hoped that the findings would encourage further expansion and settlement by showcasing the wealth of opportunities awaiting American citizens. The journey was arduous and filled with challenges. The Corps encountered difficult terrain, extreme weather, and unfamiliar wildlife, as well as frequent obstacles in navigation. They relied on Native American tribes for guidance, support, and assistance, and they established relationships with many tribes, including the Mandan and Shoshone. One of the most significant figures to join the expedition was Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman who, along with her husband Toussaint Charbonneau, served as a guide and interpreter. Sacagawea's presence was invaluable, not only for her knowledge of the land, but also because she helped the Corps appear less threatening to other tribes. Traveling with a young woman and her infant child signaled peaceful intentions, which was crucial for establishing trust with Native Americans along the route. Throughout their journey, Lewis and Clark meticulously recorded observations of the land, plants, animals, and natural resources they encountered. Their discoveries included species such as the grizzly bear, pronghorn, and bison, along with a range of plants and minerals. These observations were critical in providing Americans with a new understanding of the Western lands. The Corps faced moments of hardship and uncertainty, including periods when they ran low on food and had to rely on hunting and foraging to survive. Despite these difficulties, their determination and resourcefulness allowed them to push forward. After months of travel, they reached the Rocky Mountains, where they navigated treacherous mountain passes with the help of Sacagawea's tribe. In November 1805, after more than a year of challenging travel, the Corps of Discovery reached the Pacific Ocean. This achievement marked a major milestone for Jefferson's vision of American expansion and validated his hopes for the potential of the Western lands. The expedition spent the winter at Fort Clatsop in present-day Oregon before beginning the return journey in the spring of 1806. By September of that year, they arrived back in St. Louis, completing a journey of over 8,000 miles that had taken more than 2 years. Their return was celebrated as a remarkable feat of exploration, and they brought with them extensive notes, maps, and samples that would deepen America's understanding of the continent. The findings of the Lewis and Clark expedition had a profound impact on the United States. The detailed maps they created helped open up the West for future explorers and settlers, while their observations of natural resources fueled interest in the potential for agricultural development and commerce. This journey demonstrated that the Western lands were not only habitable, but rich with possibilities for growth and expansion. Jefferson's vision of a nation stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific was beginning to take shape, and the expedition provided tangible evidence of what the United States could achieve in its quest to expand westward. The expedition also provided Jefferson with valuable diplomatic insights. The core of Discovery's interactions with Native American tribes highlighted both the possibilities and challenges of peaceful coexistence with the region's indigenous peoples. While many tribes were helpful and supportive, others were more resistant to American expansion, wary of encroachment on their lands and resources. Jefferson's policies toward Native Americans would evolve in the years following the expedition, but the initial encounters set the tone for the complex relationship between the United States and Native American nations. The Lewis and Clark expedition not only contributed to the nation's knowledge of its new territory, but also strengthened the belief in American exceptionalism, the idea that the United States was destined to expand and dominate the continent. Jefferson's legacy was now inextricably linked with the idea of westward expansion, and the success of the expedition provided further validation of his presidency's direction. The adventure became a symbol of American determination and the pursuit of knowledge, marking a defining moment in the history of the United States. The expedition's impact would continue to resonate for decades, as future generations of Americans sought to build on the foundation laid by Lewis and Clark's pioneering journey. Part 10. Challenges of Foreign Affairs and the Embargo Act. While the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition were monumental achievements of Jefferson's presidency, foreign policy presented some of the greatest challenges to his vision of a democratic republic. In particular, tensions with European powers, especially Britain and France, threatened the peace and stability that Jefferson sought to maintain. As president, Jefferson's foreign policy aimed at avoiding war and maintaining the nation's neutrality, but the aggressive actions of European nations would test his ideals of non-intervention. The most significant foreign policy issue during Jefferson's presidency was the conflict between Britain and France, which spilled over into American trade. Both nations sought to impede American commerce in an effort to weaken their rival during the Napoleonic Wars, and the U.S. found itself caught in the middle of the conflict. British naval impressment, in which British ships seized American sailors and forced them into military service, was a particularly contentious issue. Jefferson viewed this as an affront to American sovereignty, yet his commitment to peace and diplomacy led him to seek nonviolent solutions rather than resort to war. One of Jefferson's responses to this dilemma was the Embargo Act of 1807, a bold but controversial measure aimed at avoiding war by cutting off American trade with all foreign nations. Jefferson believed that by halting trade, the United States could pressure Britain and France into respecting American neutrality without engaging in military conflict. The idea was to hurt their economies by denying them essential goods from the United States, forcing them to recognize American rights as a neutral power. However, the embargo backfired disastrously. The U.S. economy, reliant on trade, suffered severe damage as exports plummeted and American merchants, particularly in New England, were hit hardest. The embargo led to widespread resentment, and illegal trade flourished as Americans sought to circumvent the restrictions. Despite the economic pain it caused, Jefferson stood firm, believing that the embargo was the only peaceful solution to the provocations of Britain and France. However, the failure of the embargo to force a change in foreign policy led to growing discontent and criticism from many quarters. Jefferson's political opponents, particularly the Federalists, used the embargo as a way to attack his leadership and political philosophy, arguing that his policies were ineffective and damaging to the nation's economic interests. The embargo also had unforeseen consequences for Jefferson's political standing. Though his ideals of non-intervention had been based on a belief in liberty and peace, the fallout from the Embargo Act marked a significant moment of failure in his presidency. The policy left a scar on Jefferson's legacy, and by the time his second term was winding down, the embargo was abandoned in favor of the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809, which lifted the restrictions on trade with all countries except Britain and France. Though Jefferson had hoped to avoid war, the tensions between the United States and European powers would continue to simmer, setting the stage for future conflicts. Despite the failure of the Embargo Act, Jefferson's foreign policy was not without successes. His administration was able to secure the release of American sailors who had been imprisoned by the British and managed to negotiate a peaceable resolution to the Barbary Wars with the North African pirates. Jefferson's commitment to peace, while flawed in execution, reflected his enduring belief in diplomacy and the importance of protecting American sovereignty without resorting to unnecessary conflict. Part 11. The Struggles of Re-election and the Legacy of Jefferson's Presidency. By 1808, as Thomas Jefferson's second term neared its conclusion, his presidency was marked by both significant achievements and notable challenges. While the Louisiana Purchase, the Lewis and Clark expedition, and his vision for a limited federal government defined much of his first term, his second term saw increasing political opposition and frustration with his policies. The Embargo Act of 1807 had damaged his popularity, and though he had sought re-election, his leadership was now under intense scrutiny. The nation's foreign policy failures, compounded by economic difficulties, left Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party vulnerable to attacks from the Federalists and dissidents within his own ranks. Despite these difficulties, Jefferson's re-election bid was largely successful, and he secured a second term in office in the election of 1804. However, by the time of the 1808 election, the political climate had shifted, and Jefferson faced greater challenges to his influence. He announced he would not seek a third term, making the 1808 election a crucial one for the future direction of the United States. Jefferson's decision to step down was consistent with his belief in the importance of democratic principles and the peaceful transfer of power, but it also reflected the toll that political and personal setbacks had taken on him. James Madison, Jefferson's close ally and Secretary of State, was chosen as his successor and would go on to win the 1808 election. Jefferson's endorsement of Madison signaled transition within the Democratic-Republican Party and a shift in political leadership, though Jefferson's ideas would continue to influence Madison's policies. During his second term, Jefferson's health began to decline, and he became increasingly reflective on the political battles and decisions that had shaped his presidency. He took solace in his achievements, particularly the expansion of the United States and the reaffirmation of Republican ideals, but the failure of the Embargo Act and the growing division within the nation troubled him. One of the enduring aspects of Jefferson's presidency was his vision for the United States as a nation of small, independent farmers, a vision that would continue to shape American policy for decades to come. Though many of his ideas would be challenged by the realities of industrialization, urbanization, and westward expansion, Jefferson's emphasis on agrarianism became deeply entrenched in American political thought. His commitment to states' rights and limited government also left a lasting legacy, particularly within the context of evolving political struggles between the states and the federal government. Jefferson's belief in the importance of liberty, democracy, and the rule of law, while at times imperfectly applied, would continue to resonate through the generations that followed. In his retirement after leaving office, Jefferson returned to his beloved Monticello, where he focused on his personal projects, including the establishment of the University of Virginia, which he considered one of his greatest accomplishments. He continued to be an advocate for the principles of the American Revolution and to correspond with influential political figures, but his time in the public eye had come to an end. Jefferson's legacy as a founding father, as well as his role in shaping the early years of the United States, remained secure, even as the political landscape began to evolve in new directions. Though Jefferson's presidency was marked by challenges and contradictions, His commitment to the ideals of liberty, democracy, and republicanism left an indelible mark on the United States. His vision for an agrarian republic, his belief in limited government, and his efforts to expand the United States westward set the course for the country's future. Jefferson's influence would continue to shape the political, social, and economic development of the United States for generations, and his legacy remains a topic of debate among historians and political thinkers to this day. Part 12. The Decline of the Federalist Party and the Rise of American Nationalism. By the end of Thomas Jefferson's presidency, the political landscape of the United States had undergone significant changes. His administration's success in securing the Louisiana Territory and pushing forward with westward expansion helped establish a new sense of national identity. Yet these accomplishments were not without opposition. While Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party dominated the political scene, the Federalist Party, which had been one of the nation's founding political forces, found itself increasingly marginalized. Jefferson's vision of a smaller federal government and an agrarian republic conflicted with Federalist ideals, which had emphasized a strong central government and economic development driven by commerce and industry. The decline of the Federalist Party began with the election of 1800, a loss that was amplified during Jefferson's 2 terms as president. The Federalists were unable to prevent the growth of Jeffersonian ideals, and the country's increasingly decentralized politics made it difficult for the Federalists to maintain influence. Jefferson's policies, especially the Louisiana Purchase and the reduction of military spending, marked a decisive shift away from more centralized, pro-British economic policies that had characterized the Federalist era. The War of 1812, however, would play a major role in the final dissolution of the Federalist Party. While the war initially found support from many Americans, it quickly soured, particularly in New England, where the conflict's economic toll and the disruptions to trade with Britain angered many Federalists. The Hartford Convention of 1814, where Federalists gathered to discuss their grievances, was a symbolic end to the party's political power. Their attempts to limit the influence of the federal government were seen as unpatriotic during a time of national struggle, and the party never recovered from the perception of disloyalty during a time of war. The collapse of the Federalists set the stage for the rise of American nationalism and the era of good feelings, which was characterized by the dominance of the Democratic Republicans under James Monroe. With the Federalists out of the picture, there was little formal opposition to Jeffersonian ideas, and the country's political culture became more unified, focused on national expansion and economic growth. Jefferson's foreign policies, despite their flaws, had contributed to this sense of unity by keeping the United States out of European conflicts and asserting American sovereignty in the face of foreign pressures. Even after the fall of the Federalist Party, Jefferson's influence continued to shape American politics, particularly through his focus on states' rights and the expansion of individual liberty. His foreign policy, aimed at preserving peace through neutrality, had reinforced the idea of the United States as a distinct, self-reliant nation, separate from the conflicts of Europe. The idea of American exceptionalism, the belief that the U.S. was destined to lead the world in promoting democratic ideals, gained momentum during and after Jefferson's presidency. Jefferson's advocacy for agrarianism remained influential, but the economic and social changes brought on by the Industrial Revolution and the growth of cities would challenge some of his foundational ideas. Nonetheless, his legacy as a visionary who helped guide a young nation toward greater unity and expansion persisted, influencing later political leaders and shaping the nation's direction for generations. As the Democratic-Republican Party, under Jefferson's influence, continued to dominate, the American political system began to take on a new character, transitioning from the partisan struggles of the 1790s to the more cohesive, though still divided, system of the early 19th century. The rise of nationalism in the wake of the War of 1812 further cemented the United States' position as an emerging power on the world stage. Jefferson's presidency, while filled with challenges and contradictions, had set the stage for the rise of a powerful, unified American state that would continue to grow and evolve into a global force. Part 13. Jefferson's Legacy and the Shaping of American Ideals. As Thomas Jefferson transitioned into his post-presidential years, his place in history continued to grow, with his contributions to the United States shaping both the nation's political identity and its vision for the future. Jefferson's presidency, though not without its controversies, laid the foundation for many of the country's defining characteristics, including a commitment to agrarianism, states' rights, and a vision of the nation as a land of opportunity for its citizens. His beliefs in the power of education, his advocacy for the separation of church and state, and his commitment to limited government were all elements that would continue to influence American ideals long after he left office. One of Jefferson's most significant legacies was his advocacy for public education and the intellectual development of a nation. At the core of his vision for the United States was an educated electorate capable of making informed decisions to sustain democracy. He founded the University of Virginia, which he considered one of his greatest achievements, as a center of learning that would nurture the minds of future generations and promote the principles of liberty and self-governance. Jefferson envisioned education as the key to an enlightened society, one where citizens could actively participate in the democratic process and make choices grounded in reason and knowledge. Jefferson's vision for the role of government also left a lasting imprint on the American political system. His belief in a decentralized government, where states held significant power and autonomy, would continue to shape the debate over the relationship between state and federal authority in the years following his presidency. This philosophy would come to a head in the coming decades as tensions between the North and South grew, especially over issues like slavery and economic policy. Jefferson's ideas about the limitations of federal power would be invoked by political leaders, especially in the South, as arguments for states' rights during the antebellum period. The expansion of the United States also remained a key part of Jefferson's legacy. The Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition demonstrated his belief in the nation's manifest destiny to spread from coast to coast. While his vision of an agrarian republic would eventually come into conflict with the realities of industrialization, his contributions to westward expansion and territorial growth had a profound impact on the country's development. His policies set the stage for the rapid territorial acquisitions that would define American growth in the 19th century, from the annexation of Texas to the acquisition of land following the Mexican-American War. Jefferson's dream of a continental republic was slowly but surely becoming a reality, as Americans moved westward in search of land and opportunity. In his retirement, Jefferson continued to be active in politics, corresponded with other founding fathers, and reflected on the ideals that had driven his life and career. Despite the challenges he faced during his presidency, including the failure of the Embargo Act and the criticisms of his policies, Jefferson remained a staunch advocate for liberty and the principles of the American Revolution. His dedication to these ideals would continue to inspire future leaders and thinkers who would build upon his vision for a free and democratic republic. Jefferson's political philosophy, though at times at odds with the evolving realities of a growing nation, left an indelible mark on American thought. As Jefferson aged, his influence began to wane, but his legacy endured, especially through his writings and the institutions he helped create. His correspondence with John Adams, James Madison, and other intellectuals of the era continued to shape American political discourse for many years. Jefferson's retirement from public life marked a quiet period in which he focused on his personal interests, but his political and philosophical influence remained deeply embedded in the fabric of the nation. His legacy would live on through the ideals of republicanism, individual liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that he had championed throughout his life. Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, was not just a figure of his time, but a visionary whose actions and ideas helped to shape the nation's course for centuries to come. His belief in democracy, his emphasis on the rights of the individual, and his commitment to an agrarian republic would continue to echo in the political debates of future generations. Jefferson's complex legacy, marked by triumphs and failures, continues to serve as a foundation for the ongoing American experiment in democracy. Part 14. The Post-Presidency and Legacy of Jefferson's Ideals. After stepping down from the presidency, Thomas Jefferson remained deeply involved in public life, though his political role had diminished significantly. As he retreated to his home at Monticello, Jefferson continued to reflect on his life's work and the future of the country he helped shape. His post-presidential years were marked by continued advocacy for education, democracy, and Republican values, even as the political landscape in America evolved in ways he could not have fully anticipated. Jefferson's public image remained that of a champion of liberty, yet his legacy was increasingly scrutinized, particularly due to his complicated relationship with slavery. In his retirement, Jefferson's philosophical and intellectual pursuits took center stage. One of his most important contributions during this time was the founding of the University of Virginia in 1819, an institution he considered essential to the intellectual development of the Republic. Jefferson envisioned the university as a place where young men could be educated in the principles of liberty, democracy, and civic virtue, free from the influence of religious dogma. He carefully designed the university's curriculum and architecture to reflect his beliefs in reason, science, and the ideals of the Enlightenment. The establishment of the university was a testament to his enduring commitment to education as a cornerstone of the Republic. Despite the founding of the university, Jefferson was increasingly preoccupied with the legacy of slavery and its role in the United States. Throughout his life, Jefferson struggled with the institution of slavery, both personally and politically. Though he made occasional statements about the immorality of slavery, he did little to advance its abolition, and he owned hundreds of enslaved people throughout his life. His actions were often contradictory, as he both espoused the ideals of liberty and freedom while simultaneously benefiting from the labor of enslaved individuals. These contradictions have caused considerable debate among historians and scholars about the extent to which Jefferson can be regarded as a champion of liberty, given his complicity in the perpetuation of slavery. Jefferson's relationship with slavery and his failure to address it in any substantive way during his presidency casts a long shadow over his legacy. Despite his personal reservations about slavery, he did not take steps to end the practice on a national level, and his policies were primarily focused on expanding the agrarian economy of the United States, which relied heavily on slave labor. Jefferson's role in perpetuating slavery, particularly through his support for the continuation of slavery in the southern states, is a stain on his record that continues to spark discussions about the nature of American freedom and the complexities of its founding ideals. In the years following Jefferson's death, his legacy was shaped by those who admired him and those who criticized him for his contradictory views and actions on slavery. The growth of the abolitionist movement in the mid-19th century led to a re-evaluation of Jefferson's place in history, as activists sought to reconcile the ideals of the Declaration of Independence with the realities of slavery in America. The tension between Jefferson's revolutionary ideals and the institution of slavery has remained one of the most difficult aspects of his legacy, and it is a subject that continues to challenge historians and political thinkers today. Even as his legacy remained contested, Jefferson's contributions to the establishment of the United States as a democratic republic remained undeniable. His vision for a limited government, the expansion of territory, and the protection of individual rights laid the foundation for the growth of the United States as a global power. The democratic Republican vision that Jefferson championed would shape American politics for generations, influencing the debates over federalism, states' rights, and the balance of power that defined much of the nation's early history. The principles that Jefferson set forth, limited government, individual liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, would continue to resonate in American political discourse for centuries. Even as the nation moved into the 19th and 20th centuries, Jefferson's ideas would be revisited and reinterpreted by future generations as they sought to build on the framework he helped create. His legacy, though imperfect, continues to inspire Americans as they strive to live up to the ideals set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Part 15. Jefferson's enduring influence on American identity. Thomas Jefferson's death on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, marked the end of an era in American history. His passing on such a symbolic date only amplified the significance of his life's work in shaping the United States, and his influence continued to resonate long after his death. Jefferson's contributions to the nation were far-reaching, touching on political philosophy, foreign policy, territorial expansion, and the intellectual development of the nation. His leadership during the formative years of the Republic helped guide the United States through a period of growth and consolidation, making him one of the central figures in the early history of the country. In the years immediately following Jefferson's death, his influence continued to shape American politics and public life. His vision for a nation of independent farmers and his belief in the importance of education were foundational to the development of American democracy. The University of Virginia, a monument to his commitment to public education, continued to thrive as a center of learning, and his advocacy for an informed citizenry remained central to the political discourse of the United States. Jefferson's support for religious freedom and the separation of church and state also became increasingly important in the evolution of American political thought. However, Jefferson's legacy was also shaped by the contradictions inherent in his life and work. His relationship with slavery, particularly his ownership of enslaved individuals at Monticello, remained a point of contention throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. While Jefferson espoused the ideals of liberty and equality, his personal actions, particularly in relation to slavery, left a complicated legacy that would spark debates about the true meaning of American freedom. As the abolitionist movement gained momentum in the decades after Jefferson's death, his failure to take decisive action against slavery was increasingly viewed as a moral failure, and historians have continued to grapple with this aspect of his legacy. Despite these contradictions, Jefferson's impact on American political life remains undeniable. His advocacy for republicanism, the expansion of territory, and the protection of individual liberties laid the groundwork for the American political system and its subsequent development as a global power. His vision for a nation founded on democratic principles, limited government, and individual rights was instrumental in the establishment of a republic that would evolve into a modern democracy, even as it faced new challenges in the 19th and 20th centuries. Jefferson's influence also persisted through his intellectual contributions. His writings, particularly the Declaration of Independence, continued to be a touchstone for American political thought, with each new generation returning to his words as a source of inspiration and guidance. The Declaration's assertion that all men are created equal remained central to the national identity, even as the United States grappled with the realities of slavery, racial inequality, and the extension of civil rights to all its citizens. Jefferson's articulation of the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness became foundational to the American understanding of personal freedom and was central to the nation's development as a beacon of democracy in the modern world. As the United States entered the 20th and 21st centuries, Jefferson's legacy continued to be felt in the political, social, and cultural fabric of the nation. His ideas about limited government, individual rights, and the importance of education were echoed in the political platforms of both major parties, while his vision of American exceptionalism continued to influence the country's role on the global stage. Jefferson's influence can also be seen in the ongoing debates about federalism, states' rights, and the balance of power between the government and its citizens. The very concept of the American dream, where anyone can achieve success through hard work and determination, has its roots in Jeffersonian ideals of individual liberty and opportunity. While Jefferson's presidency was far from perfect, and his legacy is fraught with complexities, his impact on the United States is indelible. His contributions to the founding of a nation, his political vision, and his commitment to democratic principles continue to shape the character and identity of the United States today. Thomas Jefferson, though imperfect, remains one of the most important figures in the history of the United States, and his ideals continue to influence American political thought and global perceptions of democracy. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.